must do that election, make that choice at the time of arraignment. Secondly, Mr. President, it applies in the instances where the case is closed on both sides, and the judge therefore must give his decision as soon as is practical, but before the expiration of 14 days. It also requires, Mr. President, that the judge must give a written judgment at the time of conviction, giving the reasons for that verdict. And where a person is acquitted, the judge may, at his option, give written reasons for that verdict. And so, Mr. President, those are the, in principle, framing concepts for the judge-only trial as captured in the legislation. I will not, because I am not an attorney. I have attorneys who are very capable in this honorable chamber who will, I am sure, in great detail go over the merits and the demerits of a judge-only system, and I will defer to their wisdom. But I will take the opportunity, Mr. President, to go over the bill, even if it is with a light touch. Mr. President, the amendments that are being made in principle are, in the first instance, an amendment to Section 3 of Cap 127, where we are speaking about making changes to the mode of trial that is captured in the Section 3 of the legislation, and it reads as follows: every person against whom a bill of indictment has been preferred shall, subject to the provisions of this Act, be tried by a judge sitting with a jury unless he elects to be tried by a judge sitting alone. Now, Mr. President, sometime during the course of last year, under the office of the Attorney General, the Honorable Attorney General, Barbados hosted a symposium where they looked at a range of issues that came up as it related to legal reform. This was one of the matters that came up as a consequence or during the course of that deliberation in that symposium. And so you've already seen, or you've already heard, certainly from me and from the debate in the other place, about the mode of trial as captured in Section 3 of Cap 127. The second amendment, Mr. President, is Section 7, which speaks about amending the existing section and making a deletion, which allows for the following language to be included in great detail. I wouldn't go into it in any great detail. It will be done over the course of this debate, but it speaks about elements here, Mr. President. The judge shall, if a person arraigned on indictment pleads not guilty, inform the person that he may elect to be tried by a jury sitting alone or a judge sitting with a jury. I spoke about that earlier. That is captured in Section 7, Mr. President. And then there are further amendments also in Section 7, but Section 7B, C, D, and E, which speaks about the jurisdiction of the judge, references to jury in other enactments, the judge giving reasons for his decision. I've spoken about that as well, Mr. President, and what I didn't mention at the time was that where the person is acquitted, the judge also may, at his option, give a written reason for the verdict, but the prosecution may request reasons for the verdict if none are given, and the judge is to give those reasons also within 14 days. That is captured in subsection 7 of the legislation, Mr. President. Section 9 of the Principal Act is also being amended as captured in the draft of the bill. And then further in Section 9A of the legislation, as proposed, there is a provision for a special verdict where accused persons are found guilty but insane at the date of the act charged. These are the amendments, Mr. President, in summary form, but they speak to an overall thrust by the Office of the Attorney General and by this government more generally to legal reform as a matter of priority for this government. Much of our legislation is very dated, and what you have seen as we have sat in this honorable chamber, certainly over the last 6 years, has been a consistent attempt by the Office of the Attorney General to systematically reform and replace dated legislation. We have already before us, Mr. President, the Law Reform Commission, chaired by Sir David Simmons, retired Chief Justice. We have the Parliamentary Reform Commission, which is looking at all of the elements relating to our parliamentary system and the legislation guiding that, as well as the big ticket item on constitutional reform, Mr. President, that looks at reforming our overall constitution. We have a number of pieces of very dated legislation, Mr. President, that are now up for review. And that, Mr. President, will constitute what we all hope as a government will be a new suite of legislation ushering Barbados, perhaps belatedly nevertheless, into the third generation of the 21st century sooner rather than later. Mr. President, I will give, as I started at the beginning, a very light touch to this piece of legislation, the amendments before us. There has been an extensive debate, Mr. President, certainly in the other place and in the public space as well, and I want to address just two items here. One, that the former Chief Justice in his submissions would have engaged, along with the Office of the Attorney General, with the Barbados Bar Association to get their views through their representative bodies so that they would be in a position to give their feedback on the mechanisms. In any institution, in any association, there are always going to be conflicting views, and that is okay. All views contend, and we come to a consensus at the end of that debate. So the Bar Association is a part of the process that must be going forward, and you have heard, even in the media, differing views on how they expect it to be implemented. And then finally, Mr. President, I want to also make the point that it really is about the commitment of the government of Barbados to ensuring that the legal system continues to benefit not just from reforms, but from the provision of the necessary resources that are necessary to make it efficient and effective. It remains imperfect. There are not enough resources in the legal system. There are still some areas that need to be done, to be looked at. But what I can say is that significant progress has been made, certainly in the introduction of additional judges being appointed, the introduction of additional courts, and the plans which have already been put in the public domain for further changes to be made in terms of specialist courts. And so, Mr. President, I commend this bill to this honorable chamber, and I beg to move that it be read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Cummins. Senator Watson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the bill currently under consideration, the Criminal Procedure Amendment Bill, 2024, has serious implications for the criminal justice system in Barbados. And I think as a result, our discussion merits an examination of the background to the bill, in the sense that it is important